My name is Elena Parker. I'm 31 years old. And the strange things about humiliation is that it never arrives looking as ugly as it feels. Sometimes it comes dressed as concern. Sometimes it sits across from you at your own kitchen table, loosens its tie, swirls wine in a glass you poured for it, and asks practical little questions in a voice so calm it almost convinces you that what is happening is reasonable. 3 months ago, I lost my job on a Thursday. Tech restructuring. Budget cuts. Last hired into my division. First one carved out when leadership decided numbers mattered more than people. I had been working in software development for 5 years, making $78,000 a year. Not millionaire money, not glamorous startup founder money. Just the kind of steady, respectable salary that lets you build a life without panicking every time rent is due. I thought I had built one. I had a fiancé. We'd been together for 3 years, engaged for 8 months, and orbiting that hopeful stage where you start talking about wedding flowers, guest counts, and whether the apartment after the wedding should have a balcony. His name was Dylan Mercer. He was 29, polished, ambitious, and very fond of the version of himself that existed in other people's eyes. Back then, I still mistook that for confidence. We lived separately. He had his apartment, I had mine. We were supposed to move in together after the wedding next spring. At least that had been the plan before a 10-minute HR call turned my future into static. That Friday, I did everything I thought a responsible adult was supposed to do. I updated my resume, sent out applications, reached out to old contacts. I refused to let myself unravel in daylight. By the time Dylan came over that evening, I had even cooked dinner, opened a bottle of wine, and lit the candle on my table like pretending normalcy could somehow drag it back into existence. He kissed my cheek when he walked in, but it felt distracted. His eyes moved around my apartment too quickly, like he was already assessing damage. We sat down to eat. For the first few minutes, he barely touched his food. Then he asked, "So, how long do you think it'll take to find something?" Not cruelly, not openly. That was the worst part. I set down my fork. Hard to say. A few weeks if I get lucky. Maybe a few months. I've got savings for about 6 months of expenses, so I'm okay. 6 months? There was something in his face then, a flicker, not relief, not admiration that I had been responsible. It looked more like disappointment that I might not collapse quickly enough to justify whatever thought had already started growing inside him. "Yeah," I said. "I've always kept an emergency cushion." He leaned back. "Right." That one word lingered between us. Thin, dry, wrong. I tried to keep the evening alive. I asked about his week, about a client drama he'd been complaining about whether his mother had finally stopped texting him Pinterest links for wedding decor. I gave him chances to come back to me, to be the man I had spent 3 years defending in my head whenever he seemed colder than he meant to be. But he never really returned. He left early, claiming a headache. I stood in the doorway after he was gone, one hand still on the knob, staring down the hall of my building with that sick, instinctive feeling women get when something has shifted and nobody has said it aloud yet. The next morning, I found out what that feeling had been trying to warn me about. I was in bed, half awake, scrolling Instagram with the numb reflex of someone avoiding her own thoughts when I saw Dylan's post. A carefully angled photo of him in some coffee shop staring out a window like he was auditioning for the role of misunderstood success story. The caption read, "Sometimes you outgrow people, butterfly. Not everyone can match your energy and tan ambition. Choose yourself. #growth. It had been posted 4 hours earlier. There were already dozens of likes. Comments, too. "You deserve better. Proud of you for protecting your peace. Growth looks good on you." I remember sitting up so fast the blanket slid into my lap. My phone buzzed almost immediately. A text from Dylan. "We need to talk." I called him before I could think better of it. He answered on the second ring, sounding annoyingly composed. "What is that post about?" I asked. Silence first, then a sigh. "Elena, I've been thinking." I laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "Clearly. With everything happening with your job," he said, "I don't think we're in the same place anymore." For a second, I genuinely thought I had misheard him. "I lost my job 2 days ago." "I know," he said, and his voice took on that careful tone people use when they want credit for being honest while they're actively gutting you. And it made me realize we want different things. I'm trying to build something, move forward. I need a partner who's on my level. On his level? I stared at the wall across from my bed. The framed print above my dresser blurred at the edges. He went on, because men like that always do once they hear themselves sounding important. "You've always been talented, Elena, but talent isn't the same as drive. That hurt more than the breakup, not because it was true, because it was such a deliberate lie. I had spent years working late, learning new systems, carrying deadlines, saving money, managing my own life without leaning on anyone. I had cooked him soup when he was sick, helped him polish presentations, sat beside him when he doubted himself, loved him in all the unphotogenic ways real life asks of you. And now he was reducing all of that to one lost job and a story about ambition that made him feel superior. "So that's it?" I asked quietly. "You're ending our engagement because I got laid off?" "I'm ending things because this clarified what I need." Need. The word landed like something cold and metallic. I should tell you I screamed, or begged, or said the kind of devastating line that people replay online with triumphant music underneath it. I didn't. I just sat there on the edge of my bed with my hair a mess and my chest caving in, listening to the man I was supposed to marry explain why my worst week had made me less lovable. When the call ended, the apartment went so silent it felt staged. I looked at his post again, at the caption, at all those comments from people who had no idea he was posting little empowerment slogans while dumping the woman he'd promised forever to, because she had become briefly inconvenient. My hands were shaking, but not enough to stop me. I typed one word under his post: truth. Then I blocked him. Instagram, phone, texts, everything. After that, I cried the way you do when grief and humiliation get tangled together so tightly, you can't tell which one is choking you harder. Not elegantly, not in movie tears. I cried with my face in my hands, and my shoulders aching and mascara drying into the pillowcase I was too tired to flip over. But sometime late that night, after the worst of it passed, another feeling slipped in. Small, hard. Not revenge. Not yet. Just the first ugly outline of understanding. If Dylan could look at 3 years together and decide my value dropped with my paycheck, then maybe what I had lost was not a future. Maybe it was a mistake wearing one. 2 weeks later, when my phone rang with a callback from a company I had interviewed with before the layoff, I almost didn't answer. I'm glad I did, because that call was the first crack in the story Dylan had tried to write about me. And he had no idea yet how badly it was about to break. The company was called Ether Dynamics, and when the recruiter said the CEO wanted to speak with me personally about a senior developer opening, I actually checked the email twice to make sure I hadn't misunderstood it. At that point, I was still living in the emotional aftershock of Dylan. Outwardly, I was functional. I showered. I answered emails. I tailored cover letters and pretended every sentence I wrote about being excited for new opportunities was not being held together by caffeine and bruised pride. But inside, I was moving carefully, like someone crossing a floor that had already cracked once and might split again without warning. So when I walked into Ether's office for the interview, I wasn't expecting hope. I was expecting another conference room, another bland handshake, another manager pretending to understand software because he had once memorized 3 buzzwords from a LinkedIn post. Instead, I met Adrian Cole. He was 34, dressed simply, no performative executive swagger, no exaggerated power pose. He had the kind of presence that didn't announce itself loudly because it didn't need to. Calm eyes, sharp questions, a face that made you think he probably noticed more than he said. He shook my hand and said, "Elena, thanks for coming in. I read through your portfolio last night. I've got a few technical questions, if that's okay." I almost laughed from relief. "Please," I said, "that would be amazing." And it was. For 2 hours, Adrian asked me real questions, architecture decisions, scalability trade-offs, old bugs I had solved in ugly, practical ways that never make it into polished case studies. He challenged my thinking without trying to corner me. When I explained a product issue from my last company, he listened like he actually cared how my brain worked. That alone felt dangerous. Respect can be intoxicating when you've just been starved of it. At one point, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You know what I like about your work?" I had learned recently not to trust praise too quickly, so I kept my face neutral. "What's that?" "You don't decorate your answers. You solve the problem in front of you. Half the industry is built on ego and theater. I'd rather hire someone who can build." It was such a simple sentence. But after Dylan, after being told I lacked drive by a man who had confused image with substance for most of his adult life, I felt something inside me go very still. Steady. Scene. When the interview ended, Adrian folded his hands on the table and said, "Can you start in 2 weeks?" I blinked. "You're serious?" His mouth tipped slightly at one corner. "I try to be, at least during hiring." Then he slid the offer details across the table. Base salary, $165,000. Equity, Full benefits. For a second, I genuinely forgot how to speak. At my last job, I had been making $78,000. This was more than double. It felt less like an offer and more like someone had accidentally handed me the next version of my life before I had earned the right to imagine it. You don't need to answer this second, Adrian said, more gently now. Take time if you need it. I looked up. No. He raised an eyebrow. Yes, I corrected, breathless. I mean yes. Absolutely yes. That was the first time I saw him laugh. It wasn't loud, just warm enough to rearrange the air between us. Good, he said. Welcome to Ether, Elena. When I left the building, the afternoon light felt unreal. I sat in my car with both hands on the steering wheel and stared through the windshield until tears blurred the parking lot into silver. Not because I was sad, because I wasn't. Because for the first time since the layoff, I could feel my life moving forward without asking anyone's permission. I started 3 weeks after the breakup. Ether was smaller than my old company, maybe 30 people total, but everything about it felt more alive. People talked to each other instead of around each other. Meetings were shorter. Problems got solved. Credit went where it belonged. Nobody acted like burnout was a personality trait. And Adrian, God, he was everywhere, but never in the suffocating way. He knew the product inside out, jumped into discussions when needed, and somehow managed to challenge people without making them defensive. He listened, really listened. It made him more dangerous than arrogant men ever realize humble ones can be. Professionally, we clicked almost immediately. He trusted me with meaningful work fast. Not recklessly, intelligently. He asked what I thought before telling me what he thought. When I flagged a design issue in a planning meeting my second week, he paused, nodded once, and said, Elena's right. Let's rework it now before it becomes expensive. No condescension, no surprise that I knew what I was doing, no making me earn credibility twice. After the meeting, he stopped by my desk. Good catch. Thanks. You settling in okay? I think so. He tilted his head, studying me with that quiet attentiveness I was beginning to notice. I get the feeling you're the kind of person who says I think so, even when the answer is definitely yes. I smiled before I meant to. I'm trying not to get overconfident. Overconfidence is loud, he said. Competence usually isn't. Then he walked off before I could decide whether that sentence was just kind or whether it would stay with me all day. It stayed with me all day. We started getting coffee between meetings. Sometimes lunch if calendars aligned. Nothing remotely inappropriate. Nothing even close. Just two people who worked well together and discovered, a little inconveniently, that conversation came far too easily. He asked real questions, not the lazy conversational placeholders people throw around because silence makes them itchy. He wanted actual answers. What kind of work energized me? Why I'd gone into software? What I read when I couldn't sleep? Whether I believed ambition made people better or just lonelier. Both, I said once over coffee. He smiled. That sounds like experience. It sounds like student loans and disappointment. That too. Slowly, the story of Dylan stopped being the loudest thing in my head. I didn't tell Adrian everything at once, just enough, that I'd had a breakup, that it happened around the layoff, that it clarified some things. He never pushed, never pried, just listened in that maddeningly patient way that made honesty feel less like exposure and more like relief. A month flew by. The work was hard in the best way. I was learning, producing, sleeping again. Some mornings I caught my reflection before leaving for work and realized I no longer looked like a woman bracing for bad news. Then came the late night. We were trying to hit a deadline on a release that had been delayed twice before I joined. Most of the team had gone home by 8. By 9, the office had that strange after-hours quiet that makes every keyboard sound too loud and every pool of light feel private. I was in a conference room surrounded by notes and a half-finished debugging log when Adrian appeared in the doorway, sleeves rolled up, tie gone, looking more tired and more human than usual. You still alive in here? He asked. Debatable. He glanced at my screen. How ugly? Manageable ugly, which is still ugly. He stepped farther in, studied the code for a few seconds, then nodded. You're close. I know, that's the irritating part. He laughed softly. There's a Thai place still open down the street. Want to grab dinner once you finish? I looked at him. There are moments that arrive quietly, but divide your life into before and after anyway. That was one of them. Not because it was romantic yet, because something in his voice had shifted half an inch away from work, and both of us heard it. Still, I kept my answer light. Are you asking as my CEO or as a fellow sleep-deprived citizen? As a man making a very strong case for noodles. That did it. I smiled down at my laptop. Then yes, give me 10 minutes. Dinner lasted nearly 2 hours. We talked about everything except work at first, like we were both politely circling the edge of something neither of us wanted to mishandle. He told me about his divorce 2 years earlier, not bitterly, just honestly, that he and his ex-wife had wanted different lives and taken too long to admit it. I told him about Dylan in broader strokes, the layoff, the post, the phone call. Adrian went very still. He actually said you weren't on his level? He asked. More or less. His jaw tightened. That's not ambition. That's cowardice with nice branding. The line hit me so hard I had to look away for a second. I stared down at my glass and said, quieter than I intended, I think part of me was more embarrassed than heartbroken. Why? Because I love someone who turned out to be shallow. Adrian shook his head once. No, you loved someone before you had the full evidence. That's different. I looked at him then, really looked, at the steadiness in his face, the restraint, the intelligence that never needed to humiliate anyone to prove itself. And for one dangerous second, I understood exactly how easy it would be to fall for a man like that, which is probably why I became more careful after that dinner. And so did he. We didn't rush. At work, everything stayed exactly professional. No flirting in meetings, no lingering touches, no gossip-worthy moments for the office to feed on. But outside of work, little by little, something opened. Coffee became dinner. Dinner became walks. Walks became evenings where neither of us seemed eager to be the first one to say goodnight. 6 weeks after I started at Ether, he drove me home after we'd been out longer than planned. The street outside my building was quiet. His hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, but he didn't turn off the engine yet. I want to ask you something, he said. My pulse shifted. Okay. His eyes met mine. Would it make this more complicated than it's worth if I told you I'd like to take you to dinner this weekend and have it be very clearly not about work? Everything in me went still. Not with fear, with recognition. The terrifying kind. The kind that says, this matters. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. No, I said, it wouldn't. The smile that touched his mouth then was small, but real. Good. And somewhere far outside the safe little bubble of that car, beyond the new job and the recovering heart and the life I was rebuilding piece by piece, the past was already starting to notice I had survived it. I just didn't know yet how badly Dylan was about to care. The invitation to the gala came 3 weeks later. Ether's annual holiday event, except holiday, was just a polite label for what it actually was, a carefully staged display of success. Investors, clients, industry people who shook hands while calculating each other's value in real time. Black tie, open bar, strategic conversations disguised as celebration. Partners encouraged. I was in Adrian's kitchen when he asked. We had fallen into an easy rhythm by then, something that felt natural without ever becoming careless. Dinner at his place, music low in the background, sleeves rolled up, both of us pretending we weren't increasingly aware of how much we preferred being in the same room. He set 2 plates down and said, almost casually, you should come with me. I glanced up. To the gala? He nodded. As my date. I leaned back slightly in my chair, studying him. You realize people are going to talk. They already do, he said, unbothered. I'm the CEO. You're a senior developer who showed up out of nowhere and started fixing things people thought were unfixable. People are always going to have opinions. That's not the same thing. No, he agreed calmly. It's not. This will be louder. I watched him for a moment. And you don't care? He met my gaze without hesitation. I care about doing things the right way. And we have. You were hired before anything between us existed. You're not in my direct reporting line. Everything is clean. His voice softened slightly. The rest is just noise. There it was again. That clarity. That refusal to shrink something real just because other people might misunderstand it. I felt something settle inside me. Then yes, I said. The night of the gala, he texted me at exactly 7. I'm outside. Wear the navy dress. I smiled at the message before I could stop myself. Bossy, I muttered under my breath as I grabbed my clutch. But when I stepped outside and saw him leaning against the car in a black suit, tie loosened just enough to look intentional, I understood why confidence looked different on him than it ever had on Dylan. It wasn't about being seen. It was about knowing who you were, whether anyone was looking or not. You clean up well, he said as I approached, his eyes flicking over me once, briefly, then back to my face. You're not so bad yourself. High praise. Don't get used to it. He opened the car door for me, and the entire exchange felt so effortlessly aligned that it almost scared me. The venue was a downtown hotel ballroom, all glass and gold light and soft music drifting over conversations that were already layered with ambition. Champagne trays floated through the crowd. People laughed a little too brightly. Every introduction carried a quiet question. What can you do for me? Adrian moved through it like it belonged to him. Not arrogantly, naturally. His hand rested lightly at the small of my back as we walked in. Not possessive, not performative, just present. Clear enough that anyone paying attention would understand exactly where I stood without him needing to announce it. We spent the first hour moving between conversations. Investors, clients, other founders. I watched the way Adrian spoke to people, direct, focused, never fawning. He didn't oversell, didn't inflate. He answered questions like he respected both the product and the person asking about it. More than once, someone turned to me and said, "And you're on the dev team?" "Yes." "He speaks very highly of you." Each time I felt a quiet, steady pride. Not because of him, because of what I had built, because of the work that had gotten me here. And then I saw him across the room. Dylan. For a second, my brain refused to process it, like my eyes had pulled an old memory into the present by mistake. He was standing near the bar wearing a suit that fit just a little too tight across the shoulders, scanning the room with that same restless energy I remembered too well. And then his eyes found me. The shift in his face was immediate. Shock first, then confusion, then something sharper, something that looked a lot like regret dressed up as disbelief. I felt Adrian's hand still slightly at my back. He noticed. Of course he did. "What is it?" he asked quietly, leaning just enough toward me that no one else would hear. I kept my voice even. "That's him." Adrian followed my line of sight. Dylan had already started moving toward us. Purposeful. Too fast. Like he was trying to catch the moment before it slipped out of his control. Adrian didn't stiffen. Didn't step away. He just shifted half an inch closer to me. Grounding. Present. "Do you want to leave?" he asked. "No." The word came out steadier than I felt. "No," I repeated. "I'm okay." Dylan reached us a few seconds later. "Elena." My name sounded wrong in his mouth now, like it didn't belong to him anymore. "Dylan," I said, calm. His eyes moved over me quickly, my dress, my posture, the way I stood without shrinking, and then landed on Adrian. "Oh," he said. "Hi." There was a brief, brittle smile. "I didn't know you'd be here." I tilted my head slightly. "It's a company event." "Yes, right, of course." He let out a small laugh that didn't land. "You look amazing. I mean, you always did, but..." He stopped, because Adrian hadn't moved, because the dynamic in front of him wasn't one he could rewrite fast enough. I watched the realization hit him, not gradually, all at once. "This is Adrian," I said, my voice even, "my boyfriend." I felt Adrian's hand shift slightly against my back, not tighter, just there. "Nice to meet you," Adrian said smoothly. Dylan blinked. "Your boyfriend." "Yes, and, sorry, you work at Ether, right?" Dylan continued, words starting to trip over themselves. "So you're, what, on the same team?" Adrian held his gaze without flinching. "I'm the CEO." It was almost fascinating to watch Dylan's composure collapse in real time. His face did something I had never seen before. Not just surprise. Disorientation. Like the story he had told himself about me, about who I was without him, about what losing me had meant, was unraveling faster than he could rebuild it. "Your boyfriend is your boss?" he said too loudly. A couple of nearby conversations quieted, just slightly. I didn't raise my voice. "About as fast as you decided I wasn't on your level because I lost my job," I said. Silence. Clean. Sharp. His mouth opened. Closed. Elena, that's not fair," he said, flushing. "I was going through things. You posted that you had outgrown me 2 days after I got laid off." "I didn't mean it like that." "You meant it exactly like that." For a second, I thought he might argue, defend himself, double down. But instead, he looked at Adrian again. At the suit, the quiet confidence. The reality standing right in front of him that contradicted everything he had believed about how this story was supposed to end. "I think we should talk," he said, turning back to me, voice dropping. "Privately." "No," I said simply. The word surprised even me with how easy it was. "There's nothing to talk about." "Elena." "Enjoy the evening, Dylan." Adrian spoke then, calm and precise. "We have people to meet." It wasn't dismissive. It was final. We turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because I could feel it. That moment. The exact second something inside Dylan cracked. Not because I had hurt him, but because reality had refused to match the version of me he had reduced me to. The rest of the night should have been perfect. In many ways it was. We met investors. Closed conversations that would turn into real opportunities. Laughed. Danced once, briefly, when the music softened enough to allow it. And for hours, I forgot he was even there. Until my phone started buzzing. Midnight. Then again. And again. By the time Adrian and I got back to his place, the screen was lit up with notifications. Unknown numbers. New Instagram requests. LinkedIn messages. I opened one. We need to talk. This is getting ridiculous. Another. Your boss? Seriously? That's inappropriate, Elena. You're better than that. Another. Everyone's going to think you slept your way into that job. Is that what you want? I felt something cold settle into my chest. Not sadness. Not even anger. Recognition. Dylan wasn't confused. He wasn't hurt. He was unraveling. Adrian stepped closer, reading over my shoulder, his expression hardening. Block everything, he said quietly. I looked up at him. There was no hesitation in his voice. No uncertainty. Just certainty. The kind that doesn't ask permission to protect what matters. And somewhere in the back of my mind a thought surfaced. Sharp, clear, impossible to ignore. This wasn't over. Not even close. Monday morning, the office felt normal. Almost offensively normal. People were at their desks. Coffee machines hummed. Someone complained about a build error, like it was the worst thing that had happened all weekend. If you didn't know better, you would think nothing had shifted. But my phone, sitting face down beside my keyboard, told a different story. By 8:30, I had already blocked 3 new numbers. By 9, 2 new Instagram accounts. By 9:15, a LinkedIn message request from someone who had clearly created a profile just to reach me. We need to have an adult conversation. You're blowing this out of proportion. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Dylan had already said everything he needed to say about himself the night he walked out of my life. Everything since then was just noise layered over the same truth. Still, noise can get louder. Around 10, the office manager stopped by my desk. Hey, Elena, she said carefully. Quick question. Did someone named Dylan Mercer try to contact you this weekend? I looked up slowly. Yeah, my ex. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Okay, that makes more sense. He called the main office line Saturday morning. Said it was a family emergency, and he needed to reach you. I felt my stomach tighten. I told him I couldn't give out employee information, she continued. He got a little aggressive. Nothing crazy, just persistent. I shut it down. I'm sorry, I said automatically. Not your fault, she hesitated. Just wanted you to be aware. Aware, as if I wasn't already. Thanks, I said quietly. By Tuesday, it escalated. A message from Kevin, my former coworker, popped up mid-morning. Hey, heads up, Dylan's been talking. I leaned back in my chair, already tired. About what? 3 dots. Then, saying you're dating your boss, and it's a whole thing. Telling people you got fired for misconduct and landed this job by manipulating him. Thought you should know. For a second, I just stared at the screen. Not because I believed it, because I recognized it. This wasn't confusion. This was control. If he couldn't define me in private anymore, he would try to do it publicly. I stood, walked down the hall, and knocked lightly on Adrian's office door. Come in. He looked up when I stepped inside, immediately reading my expression. What happened? I handed him my phone. He read the messages once, then again. When he looked up, something in his face had changed. Not anger, not the loud, reactive kind. Something colder, more precise. That's defamation, he said. I know. We can shut this down. I leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. I don't want this to turn into a spectacle. It already is, he said quietly. That landed, not harshly. Honestly. He stood, walking around his desk, stopping just in front of me. Listen to me, he said, voice steady. You did nothing wrong. You got hired because you're good at what you do. Anyone who looks at your work can see that. I know, I said, softer now. Then let's make sure this doesn't touch your career. There it was again. That line he never crossed. Not I'll fix it for you. Not don't worry, I'll handle everything. Just, we deal with this properly. Together. I nodded. Okay. By Wednesday, Dylan found a new angle. An email landed in my work inbox. Subject, concerned colleague. I didn't need to open it to know it was him, but I did anyway. Dear management, I have concerns regarding the relationship between Elena Parker and CEO Adrian Cole. This appears to be a clear conflict of interest. I stopped reading halfway through. My chest didn't tighten this time. It cooled. I forwarded it to Adrian without comment. 5 minutes later, he forwarded it to HR and legal. By Thursday morning, I was sitting in a small conference room with a woman from HR who looked more annoyed than concerned. Elena, she said, folding her hands, we received a complaint. I just need to walk through a few things with you. Of course. I explained everything. The timeline. The hiring process. When Adrian and I started seeing each other, after I had already been working there, that I wasn't in his direct reporting line, That nothing about my role had been influenced by anything other than my performance. "And the person who submitted this complaint?" she asked. "My ex." She nodded once, unsurprised. "Do you have documentation of the harassment?" I slid my phone across the table. Messages, call logs, screenshots. The office call, Kevin's warning. She scrolled in silence for a full minute. Then she looked up. "This is a targeted campaign," she said flatly. "Personal, not professional." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "We'll document everything," she continued. "If he continues, we can escalate legally. As for your relationship, there's no violation here. You're not in a direct reporting structure, and the timeline is clean." "Okay, you're fine," she said more gently now. Fine. Such a simple word. Such a powerful one when you've spent days waiting for everything to collapse. That afternoon, Adrian received a cease and desist letter from Dylan's lawyer. I stood in his office while he read it, watching his expression shift from focus to disbelief to something dangerously close to amusement. "He's claiming I interfered with his relationship," Adrian said finally. I blinked. "He broke up with me." "I'm aware. And now it's your fault." "Apparently." I sank into the chair across from his desk, pressing my fingers to my temple. "This is insane." "It's desperate," Adrian corrected calmly. He picked up his phone. "I'm sending this to our legal team." "What are they going to do?" He looked at me, one eyebrow lifting slightly. "End it." They did. The response went out the next morning, methodical, precise, dismantling every claim line by line. Timeline included, evidence attached, and at the end, a quiet, devastating warning. Any further contact will result in legal action for harassment. For 3 days, there was silence. Clean. Total. I almost believed it was over. Then Friday night came. I was in Adrian's kitchen, barefoot, halfway through chopping vegetables, when my phone rang. Unknown number. I stared at it. I should have ignored it. I didn't. Elena. His voice was slurred. "Dylan. Drunk." "Of course." "How did you get this number?" I asked. A laugh. Bitter. Unsteady. "Doesn't matter." I closed my eyes briefly. "What do you want?" "You ruined my life." I almost dropped the knife. "Excuse me?" "Everyone thinks I'm crazy," he continued, words spilling now. "Brianna broke up with me because of you." "Who's Brianna?" "My girlfriend," he snapped. "She said I was obsessed with you." Silence stretched between us. Because for a moment, I didn't feel anger. I felt something worse. Clarity. "You are," I said quietly. That stopped him. Just for a second. Then his voice sharpened. "You paraded that guy around like some trophy. Made me look like an idiot. You did that yourself." "She's using you," he pushed, ignoring me. "Men like that, they don't just date employees. He wanted someone younger, someone easy to control." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was so painfully predictable. "You don't know him," I said. "I know men," Dylan shot back. "No," I said, calm now. "You know yourself." Silence. Heavy. Breathing on the other end. "You lost me," I added, softer. "And instead of accepting that, you're trying to rewrite the story so it doesn't hurt your ego." He didn't respond. He didn't have anything left that wasn't already exposed. "Goodbye, Dylan." I hung up, blocked the number. And this time when I set the phone down, my hands weren't shaking. Adrian stepped closer from across the kitchen. "That was him?" "Yes." He studied my face for a moment. "You okay?" I nodded. And for the first time since all of this started, it wasn't something I had to convince myself of. "I'm done," I said simply. The final attempt came a week later. A burner Instagram account. A long, rambling post about narcissistic women and corrupt workplaces and inappropriate relationships. No names, but the company was tagged. It didn't last 24 hours. Legal stepped in. Another letter. This one sharper. Restraining order mentioned explicitly. That was the end. No more messages. No more calls. Nothing. 4 months later, the silence is still intact. Dylan moved to another city. New job. Fresh start, according to Kevin. The rumors he tried to spread never landed. Turns out, most people don't care enough about someone else's drama to build a belief system around it. And the few who tried lost interest once the timeline became clear. At work, things only got better. I was promoted to lead developer last month. Documented performance. Clear metrics. Everything above board. Adrian made sure of that, not because he needed to prove anything to anyone, but because integrity, for him, wasn't situational. We moved in together 3 weeks ago. His place. Bigger. Closer to the office. My parents love him. My friends trust him. And me? I trust myself again. That's the part I didn't expect. That the real recovery wouldn't just be about finding someone better. It would be about remembering that I was never the version of myself Dylan tried to reduce me to. Sometimes I think about that post. Sometimes you outgrow people. He was right, just not in the way he thought. I did outgrow him. Outgrew the version of love that disappears the second things get hard. Outgrew the need to be chosen by someone who only values you when you're convenient. I commented truth because it was. We weren't right for each other. Not because I fell behind. Because he never had the depth to stand beside me in the first place. Do I feel bad for him? Not really. Maybe a little, in that distant, abstract way, you feel sorry for someone who keeps sabotaging their own life and calling it fate. But mostly, I feel relieved. Relieved I saw who he was before I married him. Relieved I didn't stay long enough to let his version of me become permanent. Relieved I kept going. He wanted someone on his level. He just never realized his level wasn't very high. And me? I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Better work, better partner, better life. Truth.